I welcome all viewers of Free Russia Forum channel. I am Daniil Konstantinov. We begin our today's stream. I apologize for some technical issues we had. We had to relaunch our stream, so we're on air. We have two speakers today. This is Russian-American historian, co-author of books FSB Blows Up Russia and From Red Terror to Mafia State, Yuri Felshtinsky. Hello, Yuri. I'm very happy to see you. Hello. And journalist, political scientist Konstantine Egert. Hello, Konstantin. Hello. This night was quite an alarming night, July 5th, because in the media they were reporting that this night there might be an explosion of Zaporozhie nuclear plant. And it's not they were spreading this information. Quite serious people were talking about it. And Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, in his yesterday's address, he said on the two plant units they set up explosives on the roofs, and the Russian authorities, they also blamed the Ukrainians for an attempt to blow up the nuclear plant, which actually means that the Russians were going to do it themselves. So these events we're going to discuss today with our guests, and I will start with Konstantine Egert, since I know Yuri Felshtinsky's opinion on that, and we'll clarify certain things with him later. Konstantin, Yuri, last time when we talked with him, he said that Putin can easily explode the nuclear plant. Besides, Yuri was saying that Putin is going to use tactical nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe, and the Zaporozhie nuclear plant is similar to tactical nuclear weapons. What do you think, Konstantin? Do you think it's just talks, or there is something behind it, some serious threat? Right before the stream, I looked up what representatives of International Atomic Energy Agency talking about it, saying about it. They monitor the situation and they don't see any immediate threat. Secondly, tactical nuclear weapons. I actually have a different idea of it. I think Putin got a lot of signals that he shouldn't do that. And not only from Americans, but from the Chinese as well. And I think that Financial Times wrote about it, saying that in March, Xi Jinping told Putin that Putin shouldn't do it. China wouldn't understand it. I can't confirm it. Nobody was in that conference room when Putin was talking to Xi Jinping, but it seems to be true. We know position of China and what it's going to be if Russia uses nuclear weapons. Probably Russia will lose Chinese support, so China doesn't accept it. The use of nuclear weapons, and they say it's going to be a tactical nuclear weapon, and they say it's small, it's not going to destroy a big territory. But the use of nuclear weapons, even if it's tactical, has strategic consequences. In this sense, there is no such a thing as non-strategic nuclear weapons, and the power of that weapon doesn't mean much in this case. And I actually should say that there might be a military response of the West to the use of nuclear weapons on the Russian side, and maybe it's not going to be a nuclear response, maybe it will be conventional nuclear weapons. But Russia will immediately lose all its allies, because nobody will understand that, because we see that there is no any existential threat for Russia. In this sense, I think Putin will be waiting. He's not going to do anything now. Such a decision to use nuclear weapons is made according to certain protocols, even in Russia. It's not like Putin has this Navy officer who is carrying this nuclear briefcase and kind of give me this case, I'm going to press the button. It doesn't work like this. They'll have to have the meeting of the Security Council, they have to discuss that and all that. So I don't think it's going to be the decision that Putin will bring up to his pocket Security Council to discuss it. Just imagine Patrushev, the head of Security Council, and Lavrov, they might understand that even after the use of nuclear weapons, they probably will have to spend the rest of their life in the ventilated bunker. And it is a good case scenario, actually. I think so far Putin is not going to do this, because I think that the response of the West will be quite serious. Yes, I would like to add from myself that Putin actually has done already things that nobody was actually expecting, and those things deprived Russia of allies and brought Russia in a complete isolation. Let me add this. Putin is a coward, and he is not a decisive person. He never stood against a rival that was stronger than he was. He was misinformed about Ukraine, that's why he got bogged in Ukraine. And I understand quite well that the forces that stand against him, NATO and its nuclear alliance, and not only because they have the United States, but they also have the UK and France with nuclear weapons, I'm absolutely sure that if he uses nuclear weapons, he will open such a Pandora box that he won't be able to close it back. And the forces that will be against him politically and in the military, they will be much stronger than he is. Yuri, we spoke with you last time, and you said that Putin can blow up the nuclear plant, and they've been discussing this issue all this past night, and I couldn't fall asleep because I was following the news, what's going on, and all that. Can we say that some preparations are made? And what do you think about the information that IAEA gives? And what do you think, will Putin use tactical nuclear weapons? Let's start with the nuclear plant. Of course, I'm not an expert in nuclear plants and exploding such nuclear plants. Nevertheless, the information that the 4 units of the nuclear plant are mined, and it was confirmed by President Zelensky, and a couple of days ago they said that Russia is removing its personnel from the nuclear plant, and it also looked like they're preparing the explosion of the plant to have less collateral. And don't forget, there is a risk. Whether they blow it up or not, they may leak nuclear waste into the Dnieper River. That will be an ecological disaster. But I read the report of IAEA, and they said that it doesn't seem that there will be an explosion of the nuclear plant, that somebody is preparing this. But I agree with everything that Konstantin said when he said that it's quite a complex decision to use nuclear weapons. And I have to say that over the last few days, there is another quite serious factor that we are not familiar with, and this is Prigozhin's mutiny. I mean, not mutiny itself, but the consequences of that mutiny. And those consequences, the result of the mutiny, will be the weakening of Putin's power. And then we need to see which way the Russian foreign policy will go to. It may go backwards, it may go to reverse, understanding that after 16 months of the war, Russia put itself in a dead end with the war itself and with escalating the nuclear threat. Or maybe, nevertheless, they will be escalating the war. and they will be escalating nuclear phase of the war. I think we will be able to see that more clearly in the following weeks and months, July, August, and September. I think these 3 months will be critical to understand what is actually going on in Russia and happened in Russia, something that we call Prigozhin's mutiny, who was behind it, who was backing Prigozhin, and what concessions Putin made, and what changes in the Russian foreign policy will be. And I agree, and I said it many times, that it would be wrong to emphasize on the word tactical nuclear weapons. We should emphasize on the word nuclear, because using the nuclear weapons will entail unpredictable consequences. So far, what the Russian leadership did and what it's going to be doing, we don't know. We hope that it will be deterred to use nuclear weapons. There are two interesting messages, texts from Russian ex-president Medvedev. The first text he wrote, and it was published after the mutiny ended. He was kind of saying that don't let these bandits to the power, they're even greater gangsters than we are, and so you will be able to make a deal with us. And the latest text he wrote, I think it came out today, and it seemed like the old Soviet concept of peaceful coexistence, where he was saying that Russia is not going to destroy the whole world with the nuclear weapons, but he was saying that the nuclear war will destroy the whole world, and we need to agree on certain things, we need to make a deal. And I think that's a new thing. So we need to see if it's going to be the change in the Russian foreign policy. Constantine, I saw that you kind of responded to what Yuri was saying. So what do you want to say? Well, first of all, I want to say that I can come up with counter-arguments to my position on the Zaporozhie nuclear plant. Because as I look at the reaction of the global community, how the global community reacted to the explosion of the Kakhovskaya dam, I think the reaction was very weak, and this act of eco-terrorism was absolutely horrible. And actually kind of contradicting myself, I might say that Putin, looking at how the West reacted on Kakhovskaya dam explosion, he might come up with something to explode the nuclear plant. Regarding Medvedev and all those surprising texts that he wrote in Telegram channel, let me say this, and I don't think he wrote all these texts, I think this is his PR people wrote it. But nevertheless, this pro-war party, those who are more radical than Putin, I don't think this party is actually quite strong, because the war is going in such a way that it's clear that if Russia will be escalating and will try to use nuclear weapons, if it's the case, then nothing will be left of Russia. My opinion always was that this is Putin's war, this is his close circle war, and he is trying to make himself like a great ruler in the history. But I think that the top of the Russian government doesn't want this war, and I think that Prigozhin's mutiny weakened Putin. It doesn't mean that Putin will fall tomorrow, but that chaos that we witnessed on Saturday, on the 25th of June in Russia, and when we saw Putin, who was both angry and scared, and he was talking about that somebody was stabbing him in the back, and then in the evening he was making a deal with the person who was a traitor. I think all this impacted the ruling class in Russia, those thousands of people who are running the country from the Far East to Kaliningrad. And I think this is what they had in their head right now. First of all, some strange people took over a 1 million, a city with 1 million people. And Putin was confused, he was angry, and he wasn't a leader. He just spent 5 minutes to address the nation, and 4 minutes out of these 5 minutes he was given a summary of first 96 volumes of Solzhenitsyn's Red Wheel, the events of the First World War and the Bolsheviks' revolution. And only at the end he realized he is the commander-in-chief, and he is the supreme commander-in-chief, and he's not a history teacher. And then he started ordering something and demanding something. Such things cannot be forgotten by the bureaucrats. But it doesn't mean that the bureaucrats will rebel against Putin tomorrow. In other words, they just don't consider him a leader anymore. The story with Prigozhin and this mutiny showed us that all those files with damaging information that Putin has against all those bureaucrats, so these files are nothing. They're worthless. This damaging information is worthless. So if you're going to start a mutiny, nothing will happen to you. This is what they saw. So these events that happened will impact Putin's system. It is undermined by it. And as I said, Putin became weaker. We still see that these people are scared. They still distrust each other. But sooner or later, some of these people, some lieutenant generals or major generals, they might get together in some sauna, and it's going to be so steamy that they couldn't be overheard there. And I think they'll come up with something. I think those hundreds of thousands of FSB officers and policemen, vice governors, and the heads of regional branches of state-owned companies, but even in Moscow, all of these people, they're thinking about what's going to happen after Putin. So it's not just a thought. They're just thinking these thoughts right now, and you can't unsee it, you can't unthink it. Actually, after that happened, I caught myself thinking that I just imagined Zolotov, the head of the Russian Guard, who is going to arrest Putin, having a deal with Prigozhin, and I think within 1 hour they can take over the power in the country with all its resources, and I think I wasn't the only one who had this idea in my head. 100%, I agree with you. Thousands or maybe tens of thousands of people had that thought. Yuri, these assumptions that Prigozhin's mutiny weakened Putin's power, do you think somehow it makes your hypothesis less solid that Putin regime will stand? Well, from Twitter of Medvedev, this is what we know, and we might believe what he said. Medvedev said that Prigozhin's mutiny was an attempt to take over the power in the country. For those hours, Lukashenko made a lot of statements, and we probably should believe Lukashenko too. Lukashenko said that there is somebody who is backing Prigozhin, but we don't know who this person is. And I think that the only force that could be backing Prigozhin, that was FSB Corporation, that was represented by Patrushev in the negotiation with Putin, because this negotiation between Lukashenko and Prigozhin and Putin, Patrushev was participating. But I think that the main negotiations were going on between Patrushev and Putin, not between Prigozhin and Putin, and let alone between Prigozhin and Patrushev. Because actually Patrushev didn't need Lukashenko at all as an intermediary in these negotiations. The key point is what conditions they agreed on when they let Putin return to Moscow and remain the president. And those, what agreements they made. If they decided to shift to reverse, then we will see de-escalation of nuclear threat. Then if those people were insisting on continuing the war, then we'll see escalation of nuclear threat. And here we will need to closely look what Prigozhin is going to be doing with his Wagner private military company. Will he stay in Belarus or he'll move somewhere else? Because right now it looks that Prigozhin was exiled to Belarus, or maybe it's just a pretension, and they're doing it so that Putin could kind of stay or seem or look strong. Because on the day of the mutiny, Putin ran away from Moscow. As soon as they heard that the militants are moving to Moscow, and Putin kind of lost the power for some time, and we know that Putin returned to the power, but we don't know how much of that power he still has. We'll see what's going to happen in the following months. They will be critical. People who were trying to dethrone Putin, if these people want to go for escalation, or if they decide to shift to reverse, we also see it. But Prigozhin in Belarus and nuclear weapons in Belarus, these are all alarming factors, and I think we should closely monitor what's going on there, and we need to watch that these nuclear weapons shouldn't be in Wagner's hands, because when this happens, then Putin and Lukashenko will be kind of shrugging and saying, so it's not them, it's just the terrorists that they were fighting against. Again, I repeat that nuclear weapons in Belarus, and I think that's quite a serious factor, and it's quite alarming.
Yuri Georgievich.
Yuri? I'm here and I can hear you. Okay. Konstantin disappeared. What can we do? There's a technical problem, I think. Okay, he told me that he couldn't stay longer. He might return. But until then, my question to you is, I always prefer to look at the worst case scenario. Let's imagine that Putin exploded the Zaporozhie nuclear plant. Let's put it like this, because a tactical nuclear weapon can be used at any point. What do you think would be a response of the West as NATO? Because, for example, in Vilnius, for the next few days, we will witness NATO summit. And what we are to expect if it happens, and what we are to expect if it doesn't happen. As I said, I think in the following weeks we will begin to understand if there are any changes in the Russian foreign policy. There are 2 points in the Russian foreign policy. It is war in Ukraine and a potential, a probable nuclear strikes from Belarus onto Eastern and Central Europe, as we know from Karagano's article, the advisor to the Russian president. If we are to witness the explosion of the Zaporozhie nuclear plant, then it means that Russia is following the path of escalating the war, and then obviously we are to expect this escalation in the attempts of launching nuclear strikes from Belarus on Eastern Europe. I'm saying attempts because of the summit, because NATO brought there on July 11th and 12th quite serious air defense systems, including Patriot systems, because NATO is expecting that Russia might make attempts to launch strikes on Vilnius from Belarus. Clearly, I'm not the only one who is concerned about Russian rhetoric of the recent days, because after 25th of June, this rhetoric is not presented anymore, except for the latest article of ex-President Medvedev, where he's talking about the need to negotiate and agree, and he's not talking about a unilateral nuclear strike, which actually indicates that Russia is shifting to reverse. But against this concept, we have the fact that Prigozhin and the Wagner group are in Belarus. And if we suppose that everything that's happening, this is a new project of FSB, and Prigozhin and the Wagner group are sent to Belarus to accomplish a new hybrid mission, then of course we need to closely watch that the nuclear weapons wouldn't be in the hands of Wagner group, because then they write it off to the terrorist attack, and neither Belarus or Russia will be responsible for that. Does the West, does NATO have adequate means to respond to the explosion of the nuclear plant in Ukraine? I don't think so. In fact, what NATO can do and should do, and what we see over 16 months, it is done, but very slowly. NATO has to give Ukraine offensive weapons, F-16, long-range missiles, and the main thing, to remove the restriction to use these weapons against the Russian Federation and Belarus. So far, they give Ukraine weapons, but not all of them for the offensive war, and they don't let Ukraine use these weapons to launch strikes on Russia. So thus Ukraine is in a situation where it's fighting the defensive war and is doing it quite successfully, but cannot win, because you can't win in the war if you are restricted or prohibited to launch strikes on the territory of your enemy. Will it change if Russia explodes the Zaporozhie nuclear station? It may change, but in fact it had to happen long ago. For example, after the explosion of the dam of Kakhovskaya hydro station, and for example after Russia started destroying the infrastructure in Ukraine. Of course things are changing, but very slowly. And what else Russia is supposed to do so that the West changes the concept of the defensive war of Ukraine to the concept of an offensive war, that which will bring Ukraine to the victory over the Russian Federation, I don't know what it can be. And we hope that the West will actually get to this conclusion on its own. And we won't have to wait until Russia explodes a Zaporozhie nuclear plant or uses a tactical nuclear weapon from Belarus. You said to accomplish hybrid missions. Can we expect, for example, that the Wagner group will try to attack Ukraine from the north, from Belarus? Yes, it's possible, and I can tell you that it's quite possible. This is how we should look at it. If we see Prigozhin and his Wagner group in hundreds, then we can suppose that this is personal security detail of Prigozhin. If we can see thousands of them, then we can suppose that these are the people who will instruct and train Belarus military forces, and maybe Russia is planning finally to use them against Ukraine. But if we see thousands and thousands of Wagner troops, then it means that Russia is planning to start a new offensive against Kiev and deploy Wagner troops there. So I think we should closely look at what's going on in Belarus, and I many times said I think that Belarus is a key element in the victory, and the victory can be delivered following three conditions: shipments of offensive weapons to Ukraine, the permission of the allies to use these weapons against the Russian Federation, and strikes on Moscow, because we saw what happened in Moscow on the 24th of June, when it was just a rumor that somebody is marching to Moscow. The city just stopped living. It surrendered right away. The president left the city. Nobody knew where he was. Medvedev flew away together with the president. The city was on its own. Not a single soul stood for the president. It was a total panic. Everything was cancelled. The buildings were under control of the Russian Guard. General Zolotov was responsible for that. And there was just a rumor that somebody is marching to Moscow. And just imagine what is going to happen in Moscow if 3, 4, 5 centers in Moscow will be struck. Say Ostankino TV station, Lubyanka, FSB office, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the building of the government, and the parliament. Moscow will surrender right at that point, and Putin will be removed right away. So therefore, until Ukraine is given the permission to launch strikes on Russia, the war cannot be won. And the third point that the war cannot be won against, and I insist on this, Belarus should be liberated. Because as we see, Russia made Belarus a bridgehead to threaten Kiev, to start the offensive from the north, also threatening the Eastern Europe, to start offensive against Eastern Europe, and also using it as a bridgehead to launch a nuclear strike on Central and Eastern Europe, as Karaganov said in his article. And also don't forget that after moving tactical weapons to Belarus, Russia will move strategic nuclear weapons to Belarus, and then it will be a threat for the whole Europe. I would like to switch from dire apocalyptic scenarios to what's happening in Russia within the ruling corporation. Two news over the last 2 days kind of confused me, how they viewed the Prigozhin's mutiny. Yesterday they returned, as they said, they returned 10 billion rubles to him, yet they confiscated, as I remember, 4 billion rubles from him. So they kind of gave it back to him with the interest. And today they returned all the weapons they confiscated from him, including the award weapon Glock that was given to him by the Minister of Defense Shoigu. So all this makes the mutiny look like a fake. So because they wouldn't punish or they wouldn't treat the rebels like this. I think you're right. My point of view is that that was an attempt of FSB to take over the power from Putin, and that was the reason why Prigozhin is not going to be punished and the Wagner troops won't be punished. And we shouldn't forget that they struck 6 helicopters while they were moving, while they were on the march, and they struck a couple of planes. And they're not going to be punished. But as part of this mutiny, they were following some orders, and I think the orders were from Patrushev, because he is the second man in the system after Putin, and the third one in the system is Director Bortnikov. Clearly, they returned all the money to Prigozhin and all his weapons. And as a result of all these events, he probably gets a raise in the FSB ranks. And I think what happened is just what happened. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I remember, neither Bortnikov nor Patrushev during the mutiny, they never stood for Putin. Actually, let's be frank, nobody was protecting Putin or standing for Putin. Even just Matvienko, the head of the upper chamber of the parliament, said a couple of words. It was quite amazing what happened. Putin just fled Moscow when he kind of fell from the face of the earth, and then, as we know, then he brought together all the Silovikis, and he had a 5-minute speech. To be precise, it was 5 minutes 12 seconds. Then it was a humiliating report about this speech. It said that Putin spoke to the representatives of the security services and thanked them for the help. Actually, it's not true, because nobody helped Putin, including Patrushev and Bortnikov. And it would be hard for them to do that, because they were probably the masterminds of this mutiny. But in fact, nobody stood for Putin to protect him, and now Putin was thanking the security services officers for the help, yet no help was delivered. It's quite an interesting fact that Putin used to sit quite far from the diplomats at this long table when he had these negotiations, and then all of a sudden he started talking to people just like that, live, shaking hands and stuff. Perhaps it was just important for him to have some activity and to communicate to the people. But on the other hand, he was trying to protect himself, and his life was valuable for the state. But now his life is not valuable for the state. He is not quite a president anymore. And I repeat that I think Putin lost the power at the point when he left Moscow. Then he got it back, not fully though, because in FSB they probably understand that after several unsuccessful attempts of taking over the power, beginning with August of 1991, They understand that Russia is not the country where you can take over the power through a coup. You need to get this power through the legal channels, legal means, and dethroning Putin through a coup is an illegal way to do that. The legal way to do that would be Putin's resignation, voluntary resignation, as it happened with President Yeltsin, or Putin's death. Then a constitutional mechanism begins to work when the Prime Minister is becoming an acting president, and then they announce new elections and vote for a new president. And I think that that's the reason why they decided not to remove Putin through this mutiny, because that was not a reliable way of taking over the power in the country, having in mind what happened in August of 1991. Let's see what will be happening to Putin and how long he will sustain in the position of the president. For some reason, I think that he will stay on this position for long. So if we accept this hypothesis that Prigozhin's mutiny was an attempt of FSB to take over the power or kind of push Putin away, don't you think that the current events in Chechnya are a continuation of this? I mean, quite a harsh and quick reaction of the federal agencies to the assault of journalist Elena Milashina and attorney Alexander Nemov. Because before there was no such a quick response, but now we have Bastrykin, the head of the investigation committee, and such pro-Lubyanka figures like Hinstein or Senator Klishas, who said that such actions are a crime, and he was demanding that should be investigated. And the victims were delivered by a special airplane to Moscow, and the Russian and Chechen ombudsmen were participating in this. Don't you think that this is a way to deal with Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya? Well, we can't say that. But what should be said, since Kadyrov's power fully relied on Putin, and as soon as Putin's position became shaky, immediately Kadyrov's authority was shaken too, and as soon as Putin is gone, Kadyrov will be gone right away too, because Kadyrov is supported only by one person, this is Putin, and I think Kadyrov understands this very well. If we are right, and if Prigozhin's mutiny was an attempt of FSB to take over the power in the country, then it is clear that FSB will use this case and will try to weaken Kadyrov as well, because I think they're fed up with Kadyrov. I would like to clarify one point. When we spoke with you, you said that State Security Agency and Putin is a frontman of this agency, and they're escalating the war to rule the world. Can we say now that FSB now is kind of more peaceful, which sounds a bit strange, but still, say, more neutral there now than Putin himself? I mean, in terms of continuing the war and escalation in this war. I used to say that FSB as an agency, in their view, it would be easier to give Putin away to the Hague Tribunal and to kind of move backwards. But the thing is, there was so much blood spilled and so many people killed. And for FSB, it's quite a risky situation. I don't think that Putin will be enough to sacrifice Putin. Now it's quite obvious that Russia will be defeated, and this is inevitable. And the global public will demand more than just Putin. The people will demand all those who were organizing the war. And we know, based on what Putin said, the first invasion in 2014 and in 2022, there were 3 people who did that: Putin, Patrushev, and Bortnikov. They made the decision. In fact, there were 5 people who made the decision: Putin, Patrushev, Bortnikov, Shoigu, and Gerasimov, the head of staff. So they were just executors, but the political decision was made by the 3 former FSB heads. And I think in FSB they take this risk into account. But in order to save the corporation, I think it would be reasonable for them to shift to reverse, to kind of play the situation back. I don't really think that's possible, though, because I think right now people understand that for Russia to become a normal country, FSB should be disbanded as a structure, and it should be prohibited for it to be revived. But I would like to repeat, let's hope that people who wanted to weaken Putin's power, they did it to shift to reverse, not to escalate. And I think right now it's not obvious, but I think soon we will begin to see it, we will begin to notice changes. And one of the most important points here will be the destiny of the Zaporozhie nuclear plant. Well, let's hope that this internal process in Russia will continue, so those spiders in this jar will kill each other, and they won't do anything crazy like explosion of the nuclear plant and using tactical nuclear weapons. We're finishing our stream. Our guest was Mr. Felshtinsky, the author of FSB Explodes Russia and From Red Terror to Mafia State. I am Daniil Konstantinov in the studio of Free Russia Forum. Please be with us, like our stream. Thank you.